Hi, this is Mike and I'm back. This time I'm inside my apartment here, which is really interesting. It was either an old, we're talking 400 or 500 years ago, stables or dungeon. And this is sort of what I wanted to get away, come to a place like this, but it's a stone in the ground building, part of the old wall of the city. So picking up where I left off at, last time I talked about how the idea of our headache clinic came about. So this segment is the most complicated part of this series I'm going to do. And I hope I can cut it down short enough to upload it to YouTube from here. And it was a little bit hard with the last one. And this is a story that I think if there's a lesson here is for someone starting their own medical practice is that there's unknowns and there's things that you never had thought about, surprises and difficulties. So a lot of the things I describe probably will not happen to you, you hope. And if they did, hopefully be better prepared than I was. But also probably what will happen are things you never expected. I hope your path was easier than mine was. Now I have to say that before I came into this, as I mentioned last time, my goals for this whole concept was not trying to get rich, and I knew that I would have some limitations without a degree in business or background in business. But I really thought, and I had a confidence, and it was an overconfidence that I could do things better, not just deliver healthcare better, but I could run a business better than the physicians I'd been working with in the past. But I had challenges, and some of them were because I was a PA. And I think you may meet some of those challenges in the same way that I did being a PA. So I want you to be prepared for it. Now this is a complicated story, and I hope I can add a little bit from memory in a way that makes sense, so I don't have to do another take on this video. So after I made this decision, and then my next phase was trying to come up with a business plan, I started thinking about things, and this is where it gets really, really complicated. And this is where I started experiencing a great deal of stress that after time eventually ended up with me deciding to just pull the plug because I'm just done with the stress part, is that you have to think about, okay, what's your bare essentials you got to do before you open up a medical practice? Well, first of all, at least in my case, I had some complications that other people don't have. One is that not only was I the owner, I was going to see patients 5 days a week, my supervising physician 1 day every other week, maybe 3 days a month, and he was going to be in another city. So first of all, I had to get special approval from the state of Washington, and it was 50-50 if they were going to approve this arrangement or not. So how do you go forward without their approval? Well, it's difficult. So here's the next problem. They could not approve any supervisory agreement until I had an address. I had to have 2 addresses, one where he'd be working and one where I could be working. They would not accept a theoretical address. It had to be a on-paper address. So that creates the next problem. You got to lease space, and virtually every office space you got to sign a 1-year contract. And you're bound to that. If you just change your mind and pull the plug, you've got to pay that money for a year, and unless you go to court, and it can get really messy. So you can see these complications are starting to form here. So, okay, now I have to get a space. So then I think, okay, like I said last time, I personally didn't have a huge bank account where I could just bankroll this whole thing, so I was going to have to get money. Now I knew it wouldn't be easy getting money either, but I needed to come up on $120,000 to get this thing going. So now we have to have a space, we have to have an address, I have to have money. Now getting the money is also dependent on having an address. Small Business Association loan, which they don't actually give you the loan, they give a loan guarantee that you have to go to first, requires a business plan, and it definitely requires a brick and mortar address for them to give you approval. So you can see how this complexity is growing. Now also, another big unknown was, could I get malpractice insurance? And if that's another, there's all these foundational blocks. If one of them is missing, the whole thing collapses. Malpractice insurance requires a physical address. They also require a state agreement with your supervisor physician. And they require an address. And then the next step, you have to get credentialed by insurance companies before you see patients, if you're going to do business with insurance companies. Now, there's different approaches to this. I can tell you with great confidence, if I ever did anything like this again, I would never, ever, ever do business with insurance companies again. And I know it's not easy to try to do it without their help, without their, contracting with them to see their patients. But it became a nightmare for me that was one of the things I underestimated by a great margin. So now you can see all these balls in the air of trying to figure out how to do the sequence. So really it came down, the first sequence I had to do is get a lease on the space. And that was a little scary because, again, if any one of these foundational blocks fell through, I was stuck paying $2,000 a month out of my pocket for the next year, paying a lease of a business space that I would not even use. So that was a dilemma. So I started looking at office spaces. I realized this was the first building block that you had to put together. I started looking at office spaces, and I live on an island. So for medical practice, the office spaces are limited, the choices. I think I looked at every office space available, and some were really run down, beat up, and it just didn't have the right image. One that was a possibility was 1970s. It would need a really big update. Everything was orange, shag carpet. You get the drift of that. It was smelled like old, musty formaldehyde. I don't know what they did in there before. But I had my eye on a waterfront office building ever since I saw it go up. I just really love the aesthetics of being on the waterfront. I think it communicated a message of peace, tranquility to patients, and I think that was the right choice. However, here's one of these first complications that I ran into that I would never ever have expected, and I hope you never run into it. I went down to the office building. There's a big banner on the side, office space for rent, call this number. I called the number, got a guy, we'll call him Ben. I said, Ben, I'm interested in looking at the office space you have available. And he said, sure. We set up an appointment. And I met with him, and he had this beautiful suite overlooking the water. And he and I talked and came up with an agreement. We had a contract. I can't remember if we signed it, but we were close to signing it. And then one day, out of the blue, I had a call from a lawyer who said, why the hell are you talking to Ben? And I said, that was the number on the side of the building. Well, you have no right to talk to Ben. He doesn't own that building. I said, how would I know that? I mean, I called the number on the side of the building. Well, apparently this guy and his wife co-owned the building, and they went through divorce, and this lawyer was representing his wife, and she had just gotten the building and part of the divorce settlement. So suddenly I was in a dilemma that his wife had already rented out the same space. I'd already taken that address. As soon as I got an address, I think even before I'd signed the contract, started this process of getting money, started the process of trying to get malpractice insurance, started the process, well, I couldn't start the process with insurance companies yet. So I'd already sent out this address, and suddenly it's not mine anymore. So I thought, now what am I going to do? Now, a backstory to this too, you think, when do I talk to at that time, and which will be again in the future, my employers? And I had to tell them something. I couldn't carry on all this business stuff in the background, and I started out in the background. I mean, I started talking to the state, because you know that it's going to create problems for most people to say, hey, I'm thinking about leaving. And there's a risk that they could say, bye, go tomorrow. I'm really mad. So what happened, I let them know that I was leaving, and it created some hard feelings. And I had to keep working there. They didn't fire me. They could have. But I didn't know when I was leaving, because I had to get all these ducks in a row. So now this problem with the lease space. So I then go and I meet with the people who leased the space from the wife. I didn't know what I was hoping to accomplish, maybe talk them out of it or something. So they were up there, and it's a pretty big suite. I mean, it would have been a perfect dream suite for what I had as far as my ambitions go, because I wanted to have a psychologist and a few other people, an infusion center and things like that, which never panned out really. But I talked to these people. They're in some kind of money management business, which does a lot better than being a PA. And I said, do you guys really need this whole space? And they said, really we don't. And we figured out they needed about 60% of it, 40% of it they didn't need. So I came back to now the real owner, not Ben, his wife, his ex-wife. we'll say Lisa. And I said to her, I said, this other group is willing to split the suite in half. Therefore, you could get more rent because, we won't make the same rent 60-40, it could end up being 120 for their side, 120% of what they originally wanted. But here's the condition. Will you do the remodeling to divide a suite in half? And she came back and said, I will. So she remodeled it. If I did it out of pocket, I had an estimate of about $10,000 to remodel. So, okay, now I have a space. Now it gets even more complicated. Their suite was 201. Now, what do you call my suite? And you think, call it anything. No, life doesn't work that way. It's very complicated. I had to go to the fire chief, who happened to be a friend of mine, and I said, I need an address, because right now I don't have an address. It's really the fire chief, it's not the post office, who determines address, because in the States, the fire department, the rescue department all want to know addresses, where they can find people if they need to. I had to wait several weeks to get an address. Now, unfortunately, I'd already sent out the original address to malpractice insurance, to the state to get approval for me for supervisory physician. Now, here's another nightmare that started happening. They actually sent mail to the original address. The state did, and the malpractice insurance company did. Both times the mail was returned as no such address, or returned as, it had the other party's address and said this person is not at this address. So it looked really bad. So now I have to go back to the state and say, just wait a minute, time out. We got a problem with the address. So we waited for the fire department to give me an address, which was 201B. The other side is 201A. Okay, now I have a solid address. I go back to the state. Go back to the malpractice insurance companies. So now, again, I may have to break this video up into two parts because this story is getting more complicated. So now the next step I really need to do is get money. And this is a step I hope that most of you can avoid. I didn't have the money. I scraped and came up with $30,000 of what I could, liquid money I could pull out of our bank accounts. I wanted a total of $120,000. So I went to, I'll say the name, is Wells Fargo. I've done business with them for 30 years, had 3 house mortgages. I thought it'd be a piece of cake. And let me tell you this story, and I may break this video up at this point because there's a lot more I want to talk about. And this is all this preliminary things of getting the practice started. So I'll make this part A, and we'll probably have to go to part B, so this tape is not so long. So I went to Wells Fargo. I could write a book on what happened with them. I meet with their business guru. So first thing I had to do is go through the Small Business Administration and get a guarantee. And that took several weeks for them to do a guarantee. And it was like a very detailed background check, looking at all my finances going back for years, come up with a very detailed plan, how many patients a day, what's the payer mix, how many days a week, how many days a year. All these things had to be worked out in detail. Who takes call, these things that you need in business, your CPA and your bookkeeper, and they had to know all these things up front. Finally, the Small Business Administration, and this is actually, thinking about it, this was before I announced it to my employers, because I remember sitting out in my car in my clinic parking lot, sort of down in the dark on the cell phone, doing a conference call with the Small Business Administration trying to get a loan. But so once that was approved, I thought I was set. It was around that time I told my employers I was going to be leaving. So now what they're doing, they're guaranteeing the loan. They're saying if this guy goes bankrupt, the government will back it up. So then I go back to Wells Fargo thinking, okay, this is a piece of cake. And it became a freaking nightmare. I met with the Wells Fargo business loan people, and they came down from the city of Bellingham down where I was at, and there's 3 of us, and I said, I'm Mike Jones, I'm a physician assistant. I've told them the whole story right out front, and the head guy there kept calling me Dr. Jones. And you know how it is as a PA, your patients call you doctor last name all the time, and you correct them, and you do it for so long, but going out the door, you've told them for years, you're a PA, they say, bye, Dr. So-and-so. You don't run out and say, no, don't call me that. You finally just say, I've told you 10 times I'm not a physician. So this guy, he kept calling me Dr. Jones, and I kept correcting him. I'm a PA, da-da-da. So it was about our second or third meeting. Oh, he said in the first meeting, he said, how much money do you need? And I said, well, I'd like to come up with $120,000. He said, you know what? Next time I'll bring her a checkbook and we'll just write out a check. We'll just give you the money right up front, get you going, and then we'll work out the details about this loan. So I was pretty happy this thing was going to work out. So we met the next time, and he started, oh, Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones. I said, do you understand I'm a PA? And he just paused and said, what's a PA? And I said, I'm a physician assistant. I'm the owner. And I could see the machines in his brain. His jaw just dropped. And he looked at me and he said, I've never heard of a medical assistant owning a practice. I'm not a medical assistant. I'm a PA. I'm licensed to practice medicine in the state of Washington. He said, I don't think PAs can own practices. Really? Well, I've spent the last year guaranteeing I could. I've met with my lawyer. I've met with the state. I got this all approved. Everything's set up. Yes, I can own this practice. Never heard of that. Never heard of that. It just doesn't make any sense that a medical assistant would be owning the practice. I'm not a medical assistant. So this is where, I really have issue with the AAPA and other people who said, the name doesn't matter. It's how you behave, treat your patients right, blah, blah, blah. The name matters. It always has mattered. And I think the people who say the name doesn't matter are people who've never tried to do anything. They either sit in offices that have no contact with reality. I'll just get off my soapbox there. But anyway, it did matter. It was a huge deal. So all of a sudden, he's going to write out a check for $120,000. He's not returning my calls. He's not returning my emails. And now I have signed a lease for this clinic. So I start this long battle with Wells Fargo, and they became it was a nightmare. I felt like I was in the Soviet Union and I'd been caught, eavesdropping or something. That they began to scrutinize my life like I've never been scrutinized ever before. They're going back. They want to know where I went to high school, what I did in high school, where I went to college, what happened in college, did I ever buy a car back in 1970 something or 87, just details. They have to know the loan. I had 3 mortgages with Wells Fargo, but they wanted me to go get this paperwork of all those mortgages that I paid off. And so now what's happening in my day job is the doctors know I'm leaving. They're not very happy with me. My patients are in total panic. They're all trying to get in. They know I might be leaving in a few weeks. I'm working 10-hour days. I'm going home at night, and there'll be these emails and letters. We need this data. We need a birth certificate. We need your copy of your passport. We need all this crap. And I literally, many days, would come home from work and start working on this Wells Fargo crap throughout the night, not go to bed at all, and then start working the next day. And it was terrible. This is where the stress thing started with Wells Fargo. So this went on for 3 whole months that I fought with Wells Fargo. And they never gave me a penny. I was so pissed off at them. So I went to see a friend of mine who owns a business in town. She's not a medical person. And she'd just gone through a process like this. And I ran into her in town. I said, man, I'm in a nightmare. I cannot get my money. And by the way, Wells Fargo finally said, we might get you $60,000, but that's tops, And then they said, we still don't know if it's legal if a medical assistant can own a practice. And I just want to strangle someone. I'm not a medical assistant. Please listen to me. I just can't believe in 2015, or whether it was 2010, that people don't know what a PA is. But they don't. They really don't. And especially, these people in business, you would think they would know better. But, it's like I walked in off the street and said, hey, I'm a medical assistant. I think I'm going to start a hospital in my basement. That's the exact attitude they had about it. So anyway, Christy, my friend, a business owner, she said, hey, here's the name of my banker. He's very kind. He's a small town banker. I think he'd be very helpful. I walked directly in his office, sat down, told him my story. He said, let me see what I can do. And I think within about 4 weeks, he did come up with the $60,000. And when we agreed at $60,000, I threw in my $30,000 to come up with $90,000 to start with. So that was the first big obstacle I faced. And because the story's going to get long and complicated, I think I'll end up doing 4 tapes. This is number 2. I'll do a second tape about the startup, and then I'll do one short one at the end, just about the duration of the practice, the things that we ran into. But you can start to feel this tension, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I did finally get my money, the $60,000 to this banker. So my recommendations at this point, and I'll pause now and then to make recommendations, is that if you can anyway finance this yourself, friends, family. Now, I came from a poor family, so there's no one in my family I could ask. But if you have people in your family that have means, if you can come up with the money yourself, and I'm sure there's plenty of PAs that could come up with $100,000 in cash without going to a bank. If you have to go to a bank, I would suggest the smallest bank you can find, a local, not a franchise bank, just a local bank, because there you're a human being, you're a person. Wells Fargo has a number. As a number on the national scale, even though I've done business with them for all these years, and it was extremely frustrating. It's frustrating that they would not return my calls, would not return my emails. And I only stuck with them as long as I did because I had a small business administration approval for Wells Fargo. So I had to do that all over again with the new bank. So that's why things, if I had foresight to see what I saw now, I would dump at Wells Fargo. I would have never gone to them in the first place. So this is end of part 2, and tomorrow, if I have time, I'll come back and do the second half of this startup, and then I'll talk about issues along the way. But I hope this has been helpful for you.